The museum has just opened our new core exhibition entitled The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do.
We named this exhibit specifically The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do. Not what hate did, but what hate can do. Because if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're bound to repeat them.
We're all really familiar with the statistic that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. But when you stop to think about that statistic, it's one person
being murdered 6 million times.
It's the systematic annihilation, persecution, and then annihilation of 6 million Jews under the Nazi regime by the Nazis and those who collaborated with them.
The purpose of this exhibition is to tell the history of Jewish life before, during, and after the Holocaust using personal stories.
Something as massive as the Holocaust is so difficult to connect to.
The Museum of Jewish Heritage tells a story in an incredible way, a horrific story of what happened during the Holocaust.
It's important to put a name and a face to the history.
It's more important than ever to put out good information about the lessons of the Holocaust and the history of the Holocaust, because there's so much disinformation and lack of information out there.
There's a historian, a Holocaust historian by the name of Professor Yehuda Bauer. He's one of the biggest Holocaust historians in the world. And he's always saying, you can't be a good historian if you can't tell a good story.
So we want to take something that is usually looked at as statistics and make it more specific by telling the stories of personal stories that happened, that these were individuals, these were people.
The way that we tell stories here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage is through the individual stories. And so rather than simply doing an exhibition about history, we tell these stories through individual stories and through objects that have been entrusted to the museum's care.
I'm 24 years old. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, so I'm of the third generation. And for my generation, we're really the last generation that will know Holocaust survivors personally. And I feel so lucky and blessed to have known my grandmother, and through the museum and my work here, I've gotten to know personally so many Holocaust survivors and heard from them their stories and what they went through, and for them to share their objects with us at the museum and to hear it firsthand.
Two particular individuals are Max Lerner, who did survive and was a heroic figure.
He was a Ritchie boy. When he and his family escaped Austria, he actually got to the States, enlisted, and went back into Europe to fight World War II. The objects that are in the exhibition are his US military uniform, his Nazi uniform, as a young Jewish man to be willing to come back into war-torn Europe, that he was fortunate enough to escape, not only to fight, but to don the uniform of the enemy, is incredible. And Max Lerner is alive today, and we're so thankful to be able to tell his story and to tell this history through his experiences.
And then there's the story of Yocheved Barber. You first see her as a young child, and then you find out that she never got to fulfill her life.
In 1941, Yocheved and her family were forced into the Vilna ghetto in Lithuania, and her parents, Rabbi Kalman Farber and Sipporah Farber, were deeply committed to practicing their Judaism. On March 27, 1944, Yocheved was rounded up in what's called a kinder action, or a children's roundup. Her and all of the other children in the HKP camp were taken to a nearby site and murdered. Her parents found out about it later that night, and her father wrote in his diary along the lines of, quote, On this day, the children of the HKP camp were taken from us. There are some holy things that we simply do not understand.
On the second floor of the exhibition, we've got what looks like a rug, an old faded rug that's up on the wall there. And this rug belonged to a family that lived in Romania, the Enzenberg family. And the story of the Enzenberg family it encapsulates the story of what happened to the Jews of that area during the Holocaust. And he grabbed this floor rug that was at the entrance to his house, and he wrapped it around his shoulders. And this is the coat that he had. This was the only protection that he had from the elements for the next couple of months. And we decided to use this shawl to tell the story of the Jews of this area of Romania and what happened to all those Jews who were marched to Transnistria and who were either sent to ghettos and starved to death or to concentration camps there that the Romanians were running. One of the reasons that I feel so close to this object is because Nachman Enzenberg was my great-grandfather.
We thought 25 years ago when we opened the museum as an institute of remembrance and education that it would be a historical institution and anti-Semitism was on the wane, that the world had seen the horrors of it and had learned the lessons of it. Sadly, in the past 5-10 years, two things are happening at the same time. One is the Holocaust survivor generation is dwindling and will soon not be with us. And two is that anti-Semitism is not waning, it is on the rise.
We're living in a world in which, very unfortunately, hatred is growing. Hatred of this group, of that group, of the third group, it just depends who you're asking.
That the exhibition opening at this time is particularly timely given the rise in anti-Semitism and hate crimes.
And I think in 2022, when there's rising anti-Semitism and racism and hate speech and xenophobia, it's as important as ever for us to learn about this history, to learn about the trends of the past, and to take any lessons that each of us individually can.
We hope, if nothing else, that people come through our exhibition understanding that this history was perpetrated against individual people.
And don't let anybody tell you it can't happen again, because it can happen again to a different group of people, and that's what we have to be aware of and be very sure that it won't happen.
It's important to learn from the past and from history, and without taking the opportunity to learn about history, people now won't necessarily know how to prevent future genocides, or being an upstander is so important to today's world and in our history.
When we see studies that a majority of younger people don't even know what Auschwitz means, it means we have not only the need, but we have the responsibility to teach future generations.
I also hope that people will take away messages about understanding what hate could do, and that each of our own individual actions truly matters, whether that's speaking up against injustice in this world or remembering to be kind human beings. I think there's so many different lessons that we can each take away from learning about this history, and different parallels that we're able to draw to current moments. And while history doesn't repeat itself, there are these patterns, there are trends, and I think it's important that more people in our society learn about this history so that we're able to carry that into the future, and along that way to honor those who came before us and never forget.
It's important for everyone to understand what hate can do today as well. The only way to teach it is to show what happened the first time around and learn the lesson from that.
I hope that when people leave the exhibition, that they will, similar to how I connect to Yocheved and to all of the countless other people whose stories we tell in the exhibition, that they'll connect to at least one person, and that they'll go home and they'll be thinking about Yocheved Farber and about her Torah scroll, or about Max Lerner and him and his family fleeing Austria, taking 3 years to get to the United States, and then him returning to fight as a Ritchie boy. Or they'll connect to Nachman Enzenberg and his rug that he had brought with him to the Mogilev ghetto in Transnistria.
But I do encourage people to come and to see it as soon as possible, because there's nothing more awesome than something new. And it's new and it's incredible.
Many people have said it's overwhelming, and that's in effect what we wanted. So I think we accomplished that goal.